from the Ahmed Cathedral Foundation. Allow me to further acknowledge Ambassador Jasbay, our ambassador based in Liberia. Welcome home, sir. Ambassador Kumsha, the SA ambassador in Eritrea. All other ambassadors that I have not listed you by names, I would like to acknowledge you. The academians, all professors that have joined this very meeting today, allow me to acknowledge you and give you a special greeting. The law students who have joined us today in this meeting, you are welcome, as well as all the other public members and the DOJ colleagues who have joined this very meeting. We would like to appreciate and welcome you today. As we proceed, we would like to acknowledge the fact that in a country like ours, with a rich history, diversity, and resilience, it is impossible to ignore the deep scars of racism that have left our society in such a despair. And these scars, however, we know and do not take it for granted that they have created many challenges within the society. And we're going to have a critical discussion today in ensuring that we shape, our future insofar as equality is concerned. And of course, just as we have it today, it is not but a dream, but a reality for all of us that we engage and begin to understand the realities that we have to reflect on the past so we can be able to shape the future for ourselves and our children. On that note, I'm going to then welcome our very own Ms. I'm going back. I'm trying to quickly zoom back into the program. I would like to then welcome our, allow me colleagues, I'm using a phone so I can be able to catch up, unless if any of my colleagues would quickly just reflect on the program. Can I have one of my colleagues to flight that program, please? As we're waiting for that, just as part of the acknowledgement that today, colleagues, we are very privileged to have a distinguished panel of thought leaders who will bring about a wealth of knowledge and diverse perspectives on the discussion of the day. And I'm hoping, Sia, that we will have our program just flighted so that we're able to quickly just reflect on it. This is the program for the day, and as then we are aware, the dialogue today is very much a critical item in this very day, and we are expecting, our minister, who will unfortunately not here. However, we've got a recorded message which we will run through so that we hear her heart insofar as this particular item is concerned. Allow me to invite Ms. Abigail Nuko, a regional representative of the regional office of the OHCHR in South Africa, for opening remarks. Ms. Nuko, over to you.
I think Abigail is muted.
Abigail, we cannot hear you. Please check your mute button.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, you're audible now.
Okay. Thank you so much, Program Director. I would also like to begin by recognizing the Honorable Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, DDG Said, DDG Mohalaba, Prof. Joe Madire, who's the member of the UN Group of Independent Eminent Experts on the implementation of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, the distinguished panelist, Commissioner Madlingozi Ritabile Ratsumo, Acting Chief Director Malefane, Ambassador Jazbai, members of the Diplomatic Corps, and of course, all the distinguished guests and colleagues that are with us today. I would also like to thank very much the Minister and the team at the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development for convening this dialogue in the context of Human Rights Month and a series of discussions that have been held this month during Anti-Racism Week. I also would like to recognize the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation for their partnership, as well as the important work that they continue to do in promoting Anti-Racism Week. Today, we are gathered with a shared vision to explore pathways towards a society where racial harmony, equality, justice are not just ideals, but lived realities. South Africa's history is marked by struggles against racial oppression and the tireless efforts of individuals and communities who dreamed of a nation free of discrimination. While significant progress has been made, the journey towards a truly non-racial society is still work in progress. This is not just for South Africa, but for every country in the world. Those who protested against oppressive past laws on 21 March 1960 taught us that fighting racism and oppression at home could mark a turning point in the development of global anti-racism standards around the world. The Sharpeville massacre was followed by widespread condemnation the world over. The UN Security Council adopted its first resolution deploring the apartheid policies by the government at the time, and later an arms embargo. The General Assembly recommended economic and diplomatic measures to put pressure on the government to abandon apartheid policies and establish a special committee against apartheid. As a number of African countries gained independence and became members of the United Nations, the momentum for change within the United Nations also grew. 5 years after the Sharpeville massacre, member states adopted the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination as the first international human rights treaty, and was also one of the first international human rights treaties that former Nelson Mandela, President of the Republic of South Africa, ratified in 1998. The General Assembly later proclaimed 21 March as the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in 1966. So this year, as we commemorate the 60th anniversary of the convention, 182 states from around the world have ratified this instrument, recognizing the prohibition of racial discrimination, meaning any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin, which has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise of human rights on an equal footing. Major progress followed the convention, including new laws around the world prohibiting racial discrimination and the historic end of apartheid in South Africa. This is an important marker of history, as it reminds us that the fight against racism and oppression deeply affected people living in this country, but was also closely intertwined with solidarity from the continent and the world over. The human rights doctrine, as we know it today, the idea that injustice at home is injustice for all of us, has permeated the world and found expression in bills of rights, including the Constitution of South Africa. Since the attainment of democracy, South Africa has taken some positive steps to ensure racial justice and counteract discrimination. This includes the passage of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, the Employment Equity Act, the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, the Prevention and Combating of Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Act, the National Action Plan to Combat Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance, amongst others. It is also noteworthy that South Africa acceded to the International Convention on Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid last year. In this dialogue, we will delve into the complexities of race relations in South Africa, identify the challenges we face, and explore innovative solutions that foster inclusivity and unity. We do so knowing that according to the South African Human Rights Commission, the largest number of cases it continues to receive relates to issues of race. The United Nations Human Rights Treaty bodies have also put forward a number of recommendations to contribute towards building a non-racial society. This includes inclusive education that emphasizes social justice, social and residential integration, public awareness campaigns, equitable land distribution, equal access to jobs, opportunities and fair wages, amongst many other areas. Building a non-racial society requires sustained effort, commitment, and collaboration across all sectors of society. It involves addressing structural inequalities while fostering a cultural shift towards mutual respect, understanding, and cooperation amongst all racial groups. We are privileged to have a diverse panel of experts and thought leaders who bring valuable perspectives and insights to the discussion and unpack what it means to build a non-racial society in pursuit of equality and human rights for all. But let me also be clear, the task ahead of us is not an easy one. Around the world, racism continues to pierce our communities, politics, media, and the online world. Dehumanizing narratives both feed and fuel fear and division. Racial and ethnic groups continue to be targeted, excluded, and scapegoated. Structural and institutional racism is holding us back and impacting the enjoyment of human rights. And we see a proliferation of racist violence and hate crimes. Racism hurts all of us, and our response must be clear and unequivocal. We must listen to people most affected. We must stand up for justice together. We must act on the legacies of the past, challenge discrimination in our societies, and dismantle entrenched structural discrimination. I say this knowing that the rising tide of pushback is upon us. But I also know that individually and collectively, just like Sharpeville taught us, we can forge ahead and we can be a force for change. I thank you, Program Director.
Ms. Noko, thank you very much for reminding us that silence, unfortunately, is the very biggest poison that we have, and it unfortunately expands through the generations to generations. As we are here today, we will be speaking out, and it is an advantage that we have today on this platform to allow us to think about this racism and build the present and the future. Now, we have had that as we are reflecting today on the very past, that we are standing in the present, and united we will stand to speak against racism and build a society where each and every individual, regardless of their race, is treated with dignity, with respect and fairness they deserve. On that note, colleagues, dignitaries, allow me to introduce our minister, who unfortunately could not join us in person in this meeting today. And this, of course, in the interest of time, I'm going to request our colleagues and check that we are ready in terms of the clip that we will be playing. Although our minister could not be with us in person today, she has shared a special for this gathering. Her leadership and commitment to building a non-racial society continue to guide our efforts, and we are grateful for her efforts and her support. It is my pleasure to invite you to watch a message from our minister. And as I do so, I would like to just give you, in a nutshell, the bio of our minister. Our Honorable Minister, Mamloko Kensani Kubai, was appointed as Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development on the 3rd of December 2024. She previously held other ministerial positions and portfolios: Minister of Human Settlements, Minister of Tourism, Minister of Science and Technology, and Minister of Communications. Minister Kubai is a member of Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. She is a co-chairperson of the Economic Sectors, Employment and Infrastructure Development, and a member of National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, and the current chairperson of the Economic Transformation Subcommittee. She holds a master's degree in Public and Development Management from the University of Wits, Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Johannesburg, formerly Vista University, a postgraduate diploma in project management from Damelin College, and completed a program for leadership development at Harvard Business School. She is currently pursuing her doctoral studies in state-owned enterprises and corporate governance at the University of Johannesburg. On that note, may I then introduce to you a trailblazer and a very strong woman, our minister, Minister Kubai. Here with a clip
Program
that we will
Director,
play for you. Thank you.
esteemed guests, Program Director, esteemed guests, all speakers, panelists, and moderator. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by extending my sincere apologies for my inability to be physically present with you today due to unforeseen circumstances. I'm, however, grateful for the power of technology that enables us to engage in the critical dialogue, uniting voices from across our nation and beyond to confront the enduring scourge of racism and advance the fight for justice and equality. The South African government remains steadfast in its commitment to eradicating racism and fostering a society built on the principle of democracy, social justice, and human dignity. Our history serves as both a painful reminder and a call to action, a call that we must answer with unwavering determination. This dialogue is not just about reflection, it is about action. It is about ensuring that the brutal events of our past, such as the Sharpeville massacre of 21 March 1960, where 69 peaceful protesters were gunned down by the apartheid regime for opposing oppressive pass laws, and the 1985 Kariga massacre, where at least 20 people were killed, never happen again. These atrocities galvanized global condemnation, leading to the designation of 21st March as the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination by the United Nations. Our nation must continue to use these memories as fuel to drive systematic change, holding firm to the ideals of justice and equality that so many sacrificed their lives for. Dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, as we commemorate 60 years since the adoption of the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination and 70 years of the Freedom Charter, we must take stock of our progress and the work that lies ahead. The African Union's 2025 theme, I quote, "Justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations," unquote, resonate deeply with our continued pursuit of social justice and racial healing. The past 3 decades of democracy in South Africa have been marked by legislative strides to dismantle systematic racism through instruments such as broad-based Black economic empowerment, employment equity policies, and the establishment of the Equality Court. We have sought to level the playing field. Yet, despite these legal frameworks, racism persists in many forms, intersecting with gender, class, and poverty. This dark reality demands that we move beyond legal reform to fundamentally shift societal attitudes and behaviors. The government has committed itself to a comprehensive right-based approach as reflected in our medium-term strategic framework. This government of national unity will continue to strengthen constitutional and human rights literacy, combat poverty and unemployment, and deepen our commitment to social cohesion. However, government alone cannot shoulder this responsibility. The fight against racism requires the concerted efforts of all sectors, civil society, academia, the private sector, and ordinary citizens. Collaboration is no longer optional, but imperative. Program Director, the racial divisions that haunt our nation will not dissipate without direct confrontation. We must empower ourselves individually, institutionally, and nationally to eradicate racism in all its manifestations. It is unacceptable that our children still experience racial prejudice in schools and communities, perpetuating the very discrimination that so many lost their lives resisting. The trauma of our past cannot be allowed to define our future. The National Action Plan to Combat Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and related intolerances serves as our roadmap in this fight. The department continues to drive initiatives to ensure the full implementation of this plan, feeding into continental and global efforts aimed at fostering racial healing. However, implementation alone is not enough. We must address the discontent between legal frameworks and social behavior. In the coming year, we will conduct an audit of the Equality Court to assess their effectiveness in tackling racial discrimination. I urge you to contribute your institutional knowledge and lived experiences so that we may refine our approach and strengthen our tools for justice. At its core, Ubuntu, the recognition of our shared humanity, must guide us. It is disheartening that this foundational value has not yet fully translated into a truly inclusive and tolerant society. This dialogue must confront the systematic and structural barriers that impede our journey towards a non-racial society. We must be bold in identifying solutions that bridge our historical divides and build lasting social cohesion. Program Director, ladies and gentlemen, while I regret that I cannot be with you in person for this dialogue due to pressing government responsibilities, I assure you that our collective mission to eradicate racism remains a top priority. We'll continue to engage in dialogue, stakeholder engagement, and policy action that advance the cause. Let us use this opportunity to engage meaningfully, reflect deeply, and commit to tangible action that will heal the division of the past and propel us towards a future defined by unity, equality, and justice. I wish you well in your deliberations. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that we can all clap hands. I was hoping to see us all clap hands, and we thank the Minister for this wonderful address, where she is reaffirming our collective responsibility to build a truly non-racial society. She emphasized much on the non-racialism, that it is not just an ideal, but a continuous commitment to equality. And the more we speak about this, that justice, of course, and inclusion will be recognized. And that is the commitment that she is giving us. She highlighted on the progress made and acknowledged the challenges that persist in our communities and urged all of us to actively dismantle the barriers that divide us. And this is the message that we carry today. And on that note, colleagues, I would like to then take this opportunity to introduce to us the key members of our panel, and that is a panel that has been set and they've been invited. We appreciate the fact that they have taken their time to really come in and have this engagement with us and remind us of our duty as the society and the individuals at large. And before I go on, I've just realized that we have DDG Muhalaba in the meeting and in the session, and I'd like to acknowledge and welcome you, sir. Allow me, colleagues, to then, and our dignitaries, to then invite Advocate Shireen, who is going to lead and facilitate a panel discussion. This panel discussion has members that have been invited who will then engage on the key issues in regards to the non-racialism topic that we have today. And in the panel, firstly, I would like to just advise us that we've got 3 panel members, and I'm going to I want to be sure, Advocate Shireen, and if you can just show by just a raise of hand, if that is so that I know that these are the only 3 panel members. Am I correct in saying that that is the full list of our panel members? If that is so, and thank you very much for confirming. Our distinguished guests and colleagues here with our very distinguished guests who are going to sit and create this dialogue so that we hear from the experts, and of course we will have a time to raise questions and give inputs into the societal critical debate of this very day. 3 of these members are, one of them is Ms. Ntabiseng Malefane. The second one is Ms. Ritabile Ratsomo. And the third one is Ambassador Jazz Bay. Ms. Ntabiseng Malefane is a South African diplomat with over 20 years of experience in the public services, including 17 years as a senior manager in the Department of International Relations and Corporations, that's DERCO, and currently serves as the Women, Peace and Security Focal Point within DERCO. Ms. Malefane holds a Master's of Science degree from the University of Witwatersrand, that's WITS. She is and has majored in ecology and environmental chemistry. She has 15 years experience in international relations, including bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. Our second guest in the panel is Ms. Ritabile Ratsomo, who is an anti-racism manager at the Ahmad Cathedral Foundation. She holds a Bachelor of Arts, Politics and International Relations and Legal Theory, and a Bachelor of Laws at Rhodes University. Of course, then she has continued, and she is a very passionate advocate of human rights in South Africa, particularly focusing on dismantling racism and apartheid's legacy. Ambassador Jesmat is a professor and a South African newly accredited ambassador to Liberia and former ambassador to Eritrea, 2012 to 2016. He holds a full professorship at the University of South Africa and was the previous director at the UNISA Center of Arabic and Islamic Studies. He was awarded a PhD in international relations from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg and studied Arabic and Islamic sciences in Cairo, Riyadh, Manchester, and Johannesburg. He is viewed by scholars as South Africa's leading scholarly and policy expert on the Horn of Africa. Currently under research is a book with the title, Why Has the Eurasian State Not Collapsed Yet? He serves on the advisory panel of the Research and Evidence Facility on Migration in the Horn of Africa, EU Trust Fund. He has authored the book Somaliland, An African Struggle for Nationhood and International Recognition, some 23 academic articles and chapters on Somaliland, South African foreign policy and Islamic thought. The scholarly book on Somaliland was hailed as highly original. On that note, allow me, dignitaries and colleagues, that we introduce to you Advocate Shireen Said. Thank you, DDG. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Program Director, thank you for the excellent job in getting us to this point and for also availing yourself at very short notice. Excellency Ms. Abigail Noko, the Office of the High Commissioner's Regional Representative here in Southern Africa, thank you for partnering with us and for all the support technically as well as personally that you provide to all of us here at the Department of Justice. My fellow panelists, and I must also take this opportunity to specially acknowledge Ambassador Iqbal Jazbai, who's been a sort of a mentor to all of us, I'm sure, who've had to walk the phases outside of this country. And we appreciate you taking your time from your schedule to join us from Liberia today. My colleagues and all of the participants that have joined online. You know, as we close Human Rights Month, we're at quite an interesting place in the life of our country's democracy. For such a long time, we've been very inwardly focused for the obvious reasons of what has been some of the challenges that we've had in our country. And as Ms. Noko had raised earlier, this is about a shared vision. But the question that we pose to ourselves today is, will some of the interplay that we're seeing both domestic and internationally unite us or divide us? We, as I said, have been focused so inwardly in terms of our challenges, and we haven't quite completed our healing, especially from racism. So we've got a few questions. So those are issues for us to consider, as I said, as we close off Human Rights Month, but certainly not close off the dialogues that we will continue to have, and we will go into next month's Freedom Month, launching some of this current interplay, checking where we are as a country and how do we either reinforce our democracy, does it have the kind of resilience? And instead of questioning, raising all of these questions, we've got to, as if one reads The Art of Sun Tzu, we've got to strengthen our internal forces. So with that said, let's turn now to our panelists. And panelists, I know that you have a set of questions, and I also know with the kind of topic that we have, we will certainly follow up and move between whatever questions come from the online participants and also to what we have posed to you, but we won't stick to those. So do feel free to come in as and when you feel appropriate. So would give each of you about 6 to 7 minutes to make some opening remarks and comments. We'll then go off onto the panelists for, the participants for questions, and I might come back to you for some follow-up points, and then eventually we'll close with a round of concluding remarks from the panelists. So I'm going to start with yourself, Ms. Ratsomo from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. And I must also say, I want to, before I come over to you, so it gives you a minute or two to catch yourself and stand in readiness to go ahead. I wanted to also just tender apologies for Professor Madeleine Ngozi from the South African Human Rights Commission, as well as to Professor Joe Modire, who is a member of the UN's group of independent eminent experts who couldn't make it today. We actually heard from him very late last night that an unforeseen circumstance had taken place. So we would have had a bigger panel, but other colleagues from their respective institutions are joining us as panelists. So we hope they will participate in that regard. So Ms. Ratsomo, let's start with you. You know, in terms of where we are as a country, we certainly see ourselves as being very tolerant. In fact, on this morning's SAFM, there were comments about how, in terms of a happiness indicator, the principles of Ubuntu have really helped us manage the tolerance levels in our country, given what we've come from. However, the trauma has not left us completely. Though we haven't also unpacked these concepts of Ubuntu in a general way for those who come from different cultural backgrounds. Have we done enough to reconcile our race relations in our country? What has been, especially as you are one of our partners, especially over Anti-Racism Week and all of our work on eliminating racial discrimination, what has been some of the findings and what have been some of the experiences and some of the big challenges and gaps that we still face as a country? Over to you, Ms. Ratsomo, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, DG Said, and thank you so much for your question. I hope that I'm able to answer comprehensively all the questions that you put before me. But, you know, as a foundation, we were involved with a number of organizations in starting what we call Anti-Racism Week. And this webinar that we're having today forms part of the outputs that we put into Anti-Racism Week. And the focus for Anti-Racism Week was really to get all sectors of South Africa involved in the conversation of how do we deal with this issue of racism. And even in the course of Anti-Racism Week, which has been ongoing for the past 10 years, so this year's Anti-Racism Week marked 10 years of us doing this campaign. I think what obviously comes out to me in the engagements that we have with people is that I think firstly, we don't have a common starting point of an understanding when it comes to how bad apartheid was, right? And because of that, then we get people who still see the benefits of some of the systems that came through apartheid. But then we also see that we don't have necessarily the same idea of what justice looks like, right? And that can be one of the barriers that persists when it comes to our journey of reconciliation as a country, is that if we don't have the same starting point in understanding the atrocities that apartheid was and the years and hundreds of years of colonialization that this country has faced, then it makes it so much harder for us then to get to a point where we can say we have reconciled, or a point where our race no longer plays a factor in society. So even with that, I think a place now where we need to acknowledge that the instruments, you know, we mentioned PAPUDA, we mentioned the equality courts, all of these mechanisms, instruments, and tools that have been in order to address this problem. Not to say that they didn't work, but I think what we need to be able to do also is strengthen those so that we then are able to co-create an idea with all members of society of what justice actually looks like and how we get there.
Thank you, Ms. Ratsomo. We just seem to have a bit of difficulty with the network, so I hope others are having much better access to the seminar. We're just all here at the Department of Justice, dipping in and out, so do bear with us. Now I'd like to go to Ambassador Jazbai. In all of our very many discussions, we've bantered between the experiences that you find in Eritrea, a little different to ours, but healing in general hasn't quite taken off as we'd hoped. And also just from your global experience, and particularly on the African continent, and you know, for this year, the African Union's theme is on racial healing and justice, especially for those of us on the African continent. However, bringing it closer to home, and we're so glad you could join us here at home. How have we? What would you say, especially with the point that Ms. Ratsomo has just raised, is we don't all have the same shared experience. So we've approached racism, tolerance, inclusivity, belonging from different angles. So what has been some of the gaps that you have seen, and where to for our nation? Because we've made reference to some of the laws, and I think we over the 30-year period have done well there. Of course, it's implementation and the quality of the implementation are still factors for us to get through. However, how do we change, as Minister said, societal attitudes? In addition, what have you, with your comparative experiences, what would you say is some points for us to consider as we move, as we close off Human Rights Month? Ambassador? You're muted. Ambassador,
Yes,
you're
thank you
muted
for,
and we can't see
yes,
you just yet. There we are.
good. Are you able to hear me now and see me as well?
Perfect. Go ahead. We
Wonderful.
can hear you. We can't see you.
Oh, I can see my camera is on here at the bottom, as well as the mic is on, as we've determined. So I guess your IT people will have to bring that screen up into the middle so that one could see it a bit more clearly.
Okay, let's leave that to the IT people. Let them work on that whilst, and we hear you very well. So perhaps we could proceed.
Let me begin by thanking the organizers for this really timely initiative, especially at a time in the history of the world where there are major geopolitical shifts. I would like to try to answer your question more, as you were saying, from an international perspective. And in this regard, this dialogue couldn't be more timely, especially so given we've seen the South African economy is interconnected with many of our huge economic partners within the African continent, as well as with the North, with Europe, USA, and China in particular. So in my experience, I believe as it was early on said, the journey towards a non-racial society is really a work in progress, and one really relies a lot on creative leadership to bring about the change required. I think you are familiar, Advocate Saeed, when, for example, working on the situation in Eritrea, one of South Africa's economic partners in East Africa and the Horn of Africa, one had to develop creative methods of advancing the human rights agenda, to advancing the universal peer review mechanism recommendations. And often, I think in each situation where we stand today, we almost need a new app, if you like, to navigate all of these range of challenges which were mentioned early on by some of your speakers. I think the one recommendation I would like to make is that clearly we can see all over the world that the young generation, which is up and coming, are exposed hugely to digital education. So this is where many of our systems, community events, universities would have to come up with very creative materials to bring about the necessary civic education on the questions of non-racism. Now, I think many of us, and this issue was tapped earlier on, the implementation of a non-racial society often depends a lot on the early days of civic education within a family structure, within schools, within universities. And then the other aspect, which was also mentioned, the fact that Minister Kubai chairs the Economic Transformation Committee, because in many parts of the world, they have a very good legal framework, but it's not matched with the basics of life, meaning basic infrastructure, basic water, basic facilities. And if that is not done, it opens up society to many other vulnerabilities and risks, to extreme right-wing thinking, to other forms of ultra-nationalism, other forms of moral vision of society, which may not tap into the national vision of a non-racial, inclusive society where the aspiration of equality becomes a reality. I think it was mentioned early on, for example, in the build-up towards setting up our new constitution, which our current president, President Cyril Ramaphosa, played a critical role. And that role was he could build on his lived experience in the trade union movement. He could build on his lived experience in the business community. And in that regard, bring all the political parties together and get an interim constitution approved, and then finally the final approved constitution to be signed off by President Mandela at that very memorable historic launch. So these elements play an interconnected role in really implementing some of the key visions in our South African context in particular. Now, I'll just conclude by giving two examples and we can continue this conversation. For example, you mentioned the case of Eritrea. Eritrea is a young state, but when it did get its independence, part of the lived experience is women played a vanguard role in the struggle for independence and self-determination. So that lived experience entered into the cabinet of the new state of Eritrea right at the beginning. And they could implement that vision of a gendered society with a balance as required. Up till today, I think some of the key top ministers in the Eritrean cabinet, for example, the Minister of Justice is a very powerful and a very knowledgeable minister who has really taken on the recommendations of the universal peer review and to implement them in a way which fits into the context of Eritrea. Liberia is another example. It's one of the oldest independent states in Africa. It got its independence in the early 18th century. And in the beginning, it was really what one would call the Cape Town of West Africa, the Johannesburg of West Africa. But 2 civil wars later, they had to start from scratch to pull together a very diverse society. I'd read a report that the 3 most diverse countries in the world is firstly Uganda, number 2 was Liberia, and number 3 was South Africa. So they've gleaned and followed the South African experiences very closely. I mean, if you would meet high school students here, they follow South African politics very closely. So they've gleaned from this, what we would call international experiences, how to bring about national cohesion, national building, nation building. And the big question is, how do the leadership of any country at different levels, business, in politics, in communities, deal with the national question, which is, as we all know, an ongoing exercise to constantly provide leadership. We can see in South Africa the challenge of misgovernance, the challenge of ultranationalism has created a huge problem for the national question in South Africa, as well as for the nation building exercise. And that particular project, which started off very well during the period of President Mandela, during the era of President Mbeki, and during the first term of President Zuma. But we all know during the second term of President Zuma, it took a serious dive, and we are reeling from that and trying to fill in those gaps now during the era of President Cyril Ramaphosa. So the issue of that soft power, that moral power, we've seen it when we travel all over the world. People look up to the South African experience, the positive ones, and how to implement them in their situation, whether it's the Eritrean comparative experience or it's the Liberian experience. Let me stop there with one last concluding point. We've seen that the other day, the former First Lady of Namibia was in Liberia, Monica Gainbos. She was the wife of the late president of Namibia, and she was sharing in her capacity as the chair of the board of the first woman president in Africa, the Presidential Sirleaf Center here in Monrovia. She was sharing the fact that Liberia in 1962, along with Ethiopia at that point, took the apartheid government of South Africa to the International Court of Justice. That act got a whole lot of things rolling in our fight for freedom. And she also mentioned the judges at that point didn't agree with those 2 countries, and they set aside the judgment to take on the apartheid government of South Africa. But just that act had a huge symbolic significance on international thinking in our drive, in our journey towards a non-racial society, aspiring for equality and the advancement of human rights. Let me stop there. I will come in a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, and as always, very decisive, insightful, and always bringing a fresh approach to various discussions. I will come back to you on some points that you raised, which is, and I think we tend to forget. So thank you for bringing that forward. We tend to forget that quiet soft power, which is very much part of our DNA, where we fully appreciate and understand the art of consultation, negotiating, mediating, which is all part of, if you look at our institutional frameworks to address to eliminate discrimination and to address equality and build a culture of unity is really pivotal in terms of how the architecture promotes and is at the forefront of resolving any of the discriminatory disputes using the techniques of mediation, negotiation, and arbitration where possible. The litigious route is actually not really well received and or promoted, even though that is the measure of last resort. So thank you for bringing us to that point. I will come back to you on the points that you raised about leadership and perhaps collective leadership, which is what we need in our country right now. Collective leadership and collective responsibility. So thank you for those comments. I'm now going to move over to our colleague across the street from the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Mr. Ntabiseng Malefane, who is the Chief Director for Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs. You probably, you've been very, very busy recently, given some of the interplay across the pond, as we would say. But again, from your perspective and being in the in our department dealing with international relations, you're probably seeing things from you get the vantage point of being in the country and then having to distill what's happening in the country externally, and also what are some of the experience externally that you found the highlights of how, and many countries do, as the Ambassador Jasmine has raised, many countries look at us and they see all the good parts of our ability to bring cohesion. We tend to see the hardest parts of where we find it's just not enough. And I think all of us agree, one act of racism is way too many, especially 30 years later. So over to you, and feel free to add in any other comments and questions that we might not have picked up on as yet. Ms. Malefane?
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Chair. I must add that I don't have a very good vantage point in terms of externally, because I'm based here at head office. I've been in this unit on and off since 2011. I call myself a human rights practitioner, not an activist, just so that I can maybe just put that up front. And I would really like to maybe just focus on our perspective on codified international human rights law, what South Africa sort of bases its positions on, specifically in the Human Rights Council, where primarily we operate in the Human Rights Council. We operate also in the Third Committee at the UN General Assembly. And currently, South Africa, as a member of the Human Rights Council, we really see our role as that being of a bridge builder and trying to make sure that we mediate between the different viewpoints when it comes to these issues, so that there is some form of common understanding and consensus on issues, rather than moving towards voting and those kind of decision making. But also just to add that when we got onto the council, in fact, when we're campaigning and even now, our major priority, or our main priority, is the anti-racism agenda.
And when we talk about the anti-racism agenda and anti-discrimination in general, we basically use ICERD as a fundamental instrument that we align ourselves with and look at. And we do this because we believe that the ICERD is a timeless convention. At the time that it was negotiated, it was seen by many member states, especially the newly independent African and Asian states, as a strong international statement against apartheid and colonialism. And as a treaty, it stood as a cornerstone in the condemnation of the international community on all practices and institutionalized policies of racial segregation. But we find that even today, it is still as relevant as it was at that time. And furthermore, as South Africa, we hosted the World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerances in 2001, what is known as the Durban Conference. And this is still a landmark conference when we talk about the anti-racism agenda, because it represented a momentous global effort to address the scourge of racism and to recommit the international community's resolve and humanity to creating fair societies free of racial discrimination. The outcome document of the Durban Conference, the DDPA, also has some overlaps with the ICERD, and I thought I should maybe just highlight those and indicate that the ICERD and the DDPA as the two instruments that we sort of use for guidance in our engagements in the human rights sphere are actually talking to each other. These principles, one of them is eliminating all forms of racial discriminations on protected grounds, strengthening domestic legislation to promote the human rights of victims of racism and racial discrimination, including ethnic and national minorities, increasing access to justice, formally sanctioning racist hate speech, educating and training police in anti-racist principles and methods, and disaggregating data collection for clear accountability. So we think that these principles should be adhered to help to promote awareness and to bring human rights home, because we can be practicing human rights out there. We need to bring it home and to commit collectively to individually embracing our national identity as a non-racist, non-sexist society. So in conjunction, the DDPA and the ICERD represent an effective UN framework for combating racism, racial discrimination, and related intolerances. And therefore, based on this, we need to make sure that we strive to remove the disparities and inequalities that are inherent in our society. I'll stop there for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you for bringing forth the very strong international background, especially with ICERD. We presented South Africa's report to ICERD in November 2023. We are busy collecting the responses for our first year round to report back to the committee, which I'm sure have received in the department, and for those who are online to take note of that time period. And what we're busy doing, in fact, the ICERD has been one of the grounding documents that we have also based much of our Equality Act along, as well as principles in the Bill of Rights, especially under Section 9. So thank you for bringing that forward to us. I will come back to you on a few other questions as to how you see us, especially in bringing the legal aspect and the overall international architecture. And well, maybe not coincidentally, but this year marks 60 years of the Covenant for the I've now just gotten myself tongue-tied for ICERD, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which, as I say, is also 70 years of the Freedom Charter, which is has many of the founding principles in the Constitution, which includes, I think, one of our most significant ones is that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Now, as I was saying, bringing all these instruments, these foundational documents that has brought us to this point, how are we still in terms of living those principles? How are we doing, especially when we report back to these communities, because we don't always feel it on the ground here in the country. So I will come back to you as you ponder on to those questions. I see that Zodwa Velleman, and I might perhaps pause on this point to say that please post your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, whichever you feel more comfortable with, so that we could also use this opportunity to tackle some of those those hard questions. I think that's something we do very well as South Africans, is really confront the difficult issues. So Ms. Zodwa Velleman, who's always a great support to the Department of Justice, but also on justice issues and also the area of women in leadership. Her question is to Ambassador Jazbai, where she says, we can never take our hard-fought democratic gains for granted. The Honorable Ambassador talks of human rights as a work in progress, which she agrees with. But when do we say we have moved from the bottom of the ladder when it comes to race relations in South Africa? And that's really one of the key, as I give you the chance to speak in a minute or two, Ambassador, one of the key factors is to putting together our responses to ICERD, etc., as to what are the benchmarks that we have, and how do we measure ourselves as whether we are progressing or whether we are regressing. So that's another point for you to consider, Ms. Malefane. But for now, I'm going to go to the ambassador and raise the issue of a collective leadership and our collective responsibility. The other one is also about galvanizing. I mean, is this, especially on social cohesion, using that soft power? How is it that we're not necessarily using it as well locally or domestically, whereas we seem to be hailed or revered for using that in terms of what the world sees? Ambassador?
Thank you again, DGG. Shall I try to first answer the question which was asked and then move to the issue of leadership and soft power?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Lovely. All right. I'm going to make a few points about the question asked, and we'll try to connect all those key points, hopefully. One, I fully agree that we cannot in any way take for granted all the sacrifices the elders who had made towards a free South Africa. I know myself in our student days in Cairo, you had the late South African Foreign Minister Alfred Inzo heading the office there in the 80s, and later even our other leaders who are now in key positions in government being there, and the sacrifices they had made to go with their families in exile and then return to South Africa with those experiences. And we all know it's really fascinating going out on the coast of Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, and visiting the Albert Luthuli Museum there. And you get to see how all these big leaders came to visit him, senators from the USA, from all parts of the world, as the first Nobel Peace Prize winner in Africa. The sacrifices many others have made, including O.R. Tambo, in the days he would, at that time, travel between capitals. I think the challenge here is how to transfer that appreciation of the sacrifices they have made to the current generation. And in this context, I'm glad now on the websites you have a lot of materials, but I still believe we need to find creative ways to capture the imagination of the current generation, particularly through digital means like TikTok and other means which will really capture the imagination of the current generation of young high school kids, university students, and so forth. I think the element of human rights is a work in progress. I think we can see all over the world if you like, the file and the project of building cohesive societies is really taken a huge knock all over the world. I think you've seen in the recent elections in Germany, there's a move towards the right, and the anti-immigration sentiment, the homophobic sentiment there. And I think you already know in the US, they had to develop a movement called Black Lives Matter. So it's really an effort where we just have to show the necessary passion, the commitment, like our elders did, like our ancestors had done. And this, all these little drops of water in a bucket would bring about a better situation. And I can see this in South Africa. I mean, the current generation of young South Africans, you can see the emergence of patterns from very conservative families where the young generation in the family are intermarrying. So you'll have a South African of Indian background marrying South African of Xhosa background and so forth. This is healthy green shoots, if you like, in our society. But I think the major issue would be the growth of our economy, the issue of economic transformation. I recall once there was a big rally in KwaZulu-Natal in Umlazi, and all of us were spoken about our beautiful constitution. It's world class and it's admired. And then it was the chance of Harry Gwala to speak at this big rally in the stadium there in Umlazi. And he posed a very practical question to us. He said, okay, now I want all the speakers here to take this constitution, put it in a pot, and now feed the people here in Umlazi. So the issue is that when people feel they are at risk, they don't have basic water, basic infrastructure, basic clinics, then they wouldn't be very comfortable. And then people, the mindset of thinking all over the world, they would want to find scapegoats. And it happened It's happening in the US, it's happening in Germany, all over the world. And I think we are also facing the same challenge in South Africa. So I think the project of when people feel, no, they have a good basic job, gives them dignity, it also helps the project of race relations itself. And then it also comes back to your upbringing in the family context, your socialization context, your lived experience with the top leaders, those who are living and those who are our ancestors, also plays a huge role on our vision. And I know many of us have at times experienced ultra-nationalism, ultra-racism in our lives. But fortunately, with the upbringing of many South Africans, we managed to prevail that situation. And I think a point which was made early on by one of our former ambassadors the other day was that if many South Africans were spent time in jail, they spent time in exile, and they went through torture, and they could overcome the travails and the pain of apartheid, then I think through that background, plus some really good growth of the economy, we would really see most South Africans moving from the bottom ladder in race relations, step by step up to the ladder in a way which will be helpful for the nation building, national cohesiveness, and inclusivity by and large. And this is where I think many of our thinkers, tacticians, strategists have really to apply our minds how to do that and fast track that. But we all know history tells us that this is not an easy challenge, but it is possible, as we saw under the leadership of President Mandela in the negotiations there, and often when I'm here in Liberia, many of the student leaders admire that movie Invictus in the way President Mandela reached out to the Afrikaner community and to the rugby community and the rugby enthusiasts as a case study of how to reach out to go against your own wishes and thinking, but more for the building of the country and the growth of the country by and large, to the extent that that movie, Invictus, the other one, which is on, I'm trying to recall the name, A Long Walk to Freedom, people glean lessons from there. And the same applies to South Africans. When I'm here based now in Liberia, when I was previously based for 4 years in Eritrea, I got to see the leadership of the current president of Eritrea. I strongly believe if it wasn't for his leadership of President Isaias, Eritrea today could well be the Libya, and then to put Humpty Dumpty together, we can see all the efforts being made to put Libya together is a long, long journey. So I've given you a very long-winded answer, but I hope some of these pointers can be put together and helpful in answering your very important question. Thank you, Zodwa.
Thank you, Excellency. We don't mind that you took time to answer very many complex questions. It will certainly be very useful in our report back, and I can see that it's also resonating with the audience very much. I'm going to come over to Ms. Malifane in a few minutes, and then Ms. Ratsumo, who I will start with on this point that you raised earlier about us not having the same vantage point, and what Ambassador was raising, which is a very, very significant in that we've not necessarily communicated and perhaps translated some of the sacrifice of our many heroes throughout our political history, and in fact, one of mine, and I want to quote because I always feel just remembering what he said just before he was meted out with capital punishment is still something, in as much as we're having dialogues and 31 years later, we're still, whilst we are a country that is now democratic, we still feel like not all of the fruits of freedom have been fully appreciated. And that is of Solomon Khalisham Mashlangu, where he said, which was his last words before he was hanged, my blood will nourish the tree that will bear the fruits of freedom. Tell my people that I love them. They must continue the fight. And that still gives one goosebumps knowing what he died for, and that every time we are able to move ahead in strengthening our democracy, that his death wasn't in vain, and that his blood, we are reaping some of the fruits of freedom. But we haven't necessarily communicated that. I don't know how many young people know that this was his last words, unless, of course, you go to the gallows here at Hoshimampuru facility, which is not readily accessible to the public, and certainly not all children or young people around the country do appreciate some of the points. And Excellency, you also raised many young people, in terms of the conversations that they do view the word differently in some quarters. In other quarters, which has been of great sadness to us, especially in the National Action Plan project, where we're still seeing racism meted out in schools, which is not what I think any one of us anticipated 30 years later. But coming to you, Ms. Ratsumo, in terms of the shared vision and the sacrifices, how has the Ahmad Kathrada Foundation found a reconciliation with this concept, and what are some of the tools and strategies you've put in place, not just through Anti-Racism Week, but in your overall work to build and support social cohesion? It would be useful to just get some of your experiences, and also where you see, how much of it do you see not being appreciated by others who've not understood apartheid in the same way. What more would we have to do? Right now we have Freedom Park, we have the Apartheid Museum. We hope to have a few other structures, and many through what we've done through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But what else would we still need to put in place so we can appreciate these sacrifices and learn from it, so that it is never repeated? Ms. Ratsumo?
Thank you so much, TDG. And I'm so glad that you raised the important issue of, how are young people feeling about this issue? I mean, during Anti-Racism Week, one of our core priorities of the week is being able to go into schools and have this conversation with learners. I mean, on our side, we do understand the challenges of schools in being able to meet the curriculum requirement. And so it often means that they're not able to have the kind of substantive conversations that we need to be able to have about both the history of apartheid as well as South Africa's ongoing journey towards the realization of human rights. And I mean, even with keeping that in mind, the fact that, schools don't often provide that opportunity to have those conversations. What we usually see happening at a school level is a growing sense of resentment, right? And it ties back into what I was saying earlier about what is our concept of justice and what is our understanding of the legacies of apartheid, right? Because, for instance, I mean, yesterday I was at a school, and one of the things that young people mentioned was their growing frustration with how the school administration handles issues of race when it occurs in their school, right? And often you find that young people are telling you that it's been swept under the rug, or that they're told that no, but that person didn't mean that, which always means that when someone has done something hurtful in the way of being racist, they're often then met with excuses as to why we should accept or tolerate that behavior. And that then often festers a sense of resentment, which goes against our project of reconciliation and nation building. I think outside of that own kind of festering of resentment, I think something that we all know is that we haven't been able to establish a core national identity, and that also speaks then to our journey on this reconciliation project, right, in South Africa. Because even for young people, I mean, with that building sense of resentment, then you find people clinging on to the kind of racialized identities that we were trying to eliminate in the past, right? So even now, you'll find that people will tend to prefer to identify themselves as a Black woman or a white male, as opposed to saying, I'm a South African, right? And even with that, it's important that we're able to go into schools to build awareness. We're able to go into schools to have the hard conversations and not leave it for them to deal with at a university stage where that sense of frustration and anger might have just been compounded. So even with that, I think it's an opportunity that our governmental departments such as DISEC can look is that we also commemorate national days, right? For instance, we look at December 16, right, the Day of Reconciliation, and many young people don't even understand what that day or the history behind that day. I mean, I'm someone who was born post 1994, and I didn't even know until I was in tertiary that the history of Reconciliation Day stems back from the war of on the Blood River, and that kind of intentionality when it comes to celebrating or commemorating our national days, I think needs to be strengthened in the way that we do it. I mean, for example, in Australia, they commemorate what they call Sorry Day, and Sorry Day speaks to the kind of recognition of the violence that was put before the Indigenous people of Australia, and that is the beginning of a reconciliation week, where the whole week is then about making sure that there is that kind of understanding, the dialogues, whether it's workshops as well, and bridging the gaps of understanding between both the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people of Australia. So I think outside of just even the national days, we need to be more intentional about our curriculum and what it is that we expose our young people to.
Thank you very much. Two other questions that have come up. I am going to respond to some of the points that you raise, Ms. Ratsumo. They're very, very significant, but I want to quickly put out two of the questions that have come, three questions actually, that have come through, so that the panelists and anyone else in the audience wants to respond could just gather their thoughts. The first one is, we acknowledge the embedded commitment to eliminating all forms of race discrimination and promote understanding amongst all races. In reality, how do we actually do that? The Prof mentioned societal attitudes. We can't force people's prerogatives in relation to their world's views. Worse, some of us experience these nuances every day. How can we speak of both? So that's one of the questions. The next question is education and awareness, and I think you've already responded to some of this, Ms. Ratsumo. How can schools and workplaces better educate people about systemic racism? The third question is, workplace and institutional racism, which comes from one of the interns here at our Department of Justice. How can organizations actively promote anti-racism in their policies and culture? And then one other question that came through, which I can't quite see as easily, so just bear with me in a minute. I'm trying to read it off the screen. Which deals with the socioeconomic issues, and I'm going to summarize the socioeconomic issues in the country, which Prof spoke to, is to this is one of the risks that threaten and sort of intensify issues on race. If somebody could summarize those questions for me, I just can't read it off the screen because of the network. But perhaps I will come to give you a minute or two, Ms. Ratsoma. I will come through to Ms. Malifane. As we look, and as I raised earlier, as we look at a lot of the responses that we present to these UN bodies, we also discuss in all of the fora, the reality is that we haven't always, and sort of before I say the reality, but there's also that interrelationship with all of the rights. So whilst we have all of the legislative framework, what are some of the comments that you find coming through from these UN committees about especially the socioeconomic aspects, and how is it reconciled? And from your perspective, of do we respond to this sufficiently? Because unemployment is quite a major factor. Poverty and all of its multidimensionality and how it affects other parts of our lives are quite worrisome. And then also a point that I would raise when Ms. Ratsumo speaks to gives us a response is, do we have the right tools for our teaching communities? Do we as a country at the national level have national tools to be able to respond each time, as somebody said, I think it was Larato, we experience these not just nuances, but we experience racism and different forms of it on a daily basis outside of the socioeconomic factors particularly. So how do we respond to that? Many times we do so with anger, which inflames the moment. But is this not an opportunity as well for us to bring people to understand the hurt that they're causing? And many do so subconsciously without even factoring or appreciating what the circumstances are. But let me go back to Ms. Malifane, and any other comments you might want to pick up from the discussion. Please, over to you.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I actually wanted to start by responding to the earlier comment in terms of not being.
Have we lost Ms. Malifane? There you are.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Yes, by responding to the comment that was made earlier on that we are not all looking from the same vantage point, and to just explain a little bit, sometimes when you greet people, mostly in the township, and say, hey, how are you, Sisi? They say, hey, you know what, kuraf, my dear. And we take that sort of as a greeting. But the reality is that we are all navigating the rough seas of the economy, rising electricity prices, challenges with water, and so on. However, what we tend to not take into account is that we are not all in the same boat. Some have ocean liners to navigate the same rough seas. Some have rubber dinghies, others have different kinds of boats, and that's what we need to maybe just put at the back of our minds, that as much as we are all navigating the same rough waters, but we are not all in the same boat, and some boats are better equipped to navigate those waters than some, and other people don't really have boats at all, and they tend to eventually drown because it is that bad. The second issue that I wanted to raise is we talk about racial discrimination now, but we need to also just consider that when race is also intersecting with other things, you are Black, you are a woman, you are disabled, sometimes you are even LGBTQI, it sort of add up. And those all intersecting forms of discrimination sort of push you down and further down on the ladder. and you find yourself that you're at the bottom and you can't really do much to try and get back up because you have all these things that are stacked up against you as an individual. So when we talk about race, we must just put at the back of our minds that there's also other forms of discrimination which sort of intersect and make the situation worse. And going back to my issue of the boats, that then your boat gets a little bit more holes in it. You have the hole that you are now a disabled person. The other hole is that you're a woman, and you find yourself in a boat that is leaking. Having said that, I want to come back to the question of how are we looking internationally. It's a mixed bag. We are reporting, which is a good thing that we are reporting. However, a lot of the time our reports are late. And also we presented to the ICERD, the committee in December 2023, and as chair indicated, the committee raised some questions which we still have to respond to. And as we are responding to those questions, the next report is due in a very short time. So we have to balance all those things. On the positive side, the committee did acknowledge the good things that the country is doing, especially the legislative framework, the National Action Plan, and so on. But it also raised some issues, access to justice being one of those that I want to highlight, that the committee raised issues on the issues around access to justice, the issue of violence in the country that is pervasive. They raised issues on that, on violent attacks, and also coming to the socioeconomic issues. They talked about the right to work. Our unemployment rates are at a level where they are literally impeding the people's rights to work. So they raised issues on the right to work, issues on land rights, and also the other issue that I wanted to stress is lack of disaggregated data. I mentioned this as well when I was talking about the points that intersect between the ICERD and the DDPA. There's an issue about data, and we are not doing well on data collection, especially when we talk about disaggregated data, and to also have data on migrants, asylum seekers, and those groups. We are also not doing well on that. I'm not sure to say whether I can say we are responding sufficiently. One thing that I've picked up, not only with this convention, is that as South Africa, when we respond, we tend to be on the defensive and try and make things look better than what they are. Whereas what the committee is looking for is the truth, to say, on this, we are doing 1, 2, 3. However, we still need to do 5, 6, and 7. And not to try and make ourselves look better than what we are. We simply need to acknowledge, to say, yes, there's still challenges, and we are going to try and address those challenges. And so that is the one comment that I can make, to say, are we responding sufficiently? We are responding, but we try and make ourselves look good. We shouldn't be on the defensive. We should rather indicate the status and rather the efforts that are being made to address those challenges. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at many of the questions, and thank you to all for sending us these questions. A few others that have come through, and I'm going to try and summarize them. So please don't be too upset if it's not. You can always make a comment later on in the chat. One of the Katora's members, and this goes to the heart of our infrastructure, one of the Katora's parliament beneficiaries and this is raised by a member of the Katora's parliament, raises a complaint where someone used the K word, and they then went off to the police officer, whose comment was, "Don't worry, this case won't go anywhere." And it seemed like as the police officer predicted, the case didn't go anywhere, and it was just left. So, well, thank you for putting also the details of the case number, just for your background information. We also have a rapid response task team that picks up some of these challenges, especially if equality courts or courts in general are not operating in the sense of taking up these matters. So it's good that you put, and I think that's part of the collective responsibility. It's good that you put the case number so we could trace it. Very often we get these types of complaints, however, with very little evidence for us to go back and investigate and hold people to account. So this is a very good example, not of the matter that was experienced, but of how we can also just contribute to our democracy by calling out those services that are not operating efficiently and effectively, and also not taking up these types of complaints, because that's the point of having some of these structures. There's another comment here which says, our concern is that if SAPS fails an individual, a victim of crime, we really just can't find ways to get the accused convicted. It brings the entire justice system into disrepute. There's another question here which says that we need to have an honest conversation about racism. Is it just we just keep talking about it, and our biggest problem is we've put reparations and justice in the back banner. My question then, partly in response, is, isn't that the point of us having these types of dialogues? And as you said, Ms. Malifane, when we speak to each other, we then just comment, it's been a rough day, and not always articulate some of these experiences that make it a rough day, especially when it has been racist. And this is where we speak about what are the tools for us to recover from that for our own personal well-being, but also to hold whomever has meted out this kind of behavior to us to account. How do we manage that in a way that keeps us safe, but also empowers us to move along? Now, there have been a few other questions. I think there's been a lot on racism in schools, and I've raised some of those and one of these experiences, and as I come back to you, Ms. Ratsomo, and I'll start rounding up with some of, for us to start having some concluding remarks after we've taken the last few rounds of questions. And this question also speaks to when Black kids fight at school, white teachers stand and do nothing, especially if one is injured. Is this part of racism or ignorance? And is this part of us not knowing what to do? And or is it just attitudinal? Do we not appreciate each other? Is this gone back to us not respecting each other as just the human, us as human beings, as opposed to what color we are? So, Ms. Ratsumo, from some of these comments, any further responses, especially with the kind of work you do at Ahmed Kathrada Foundation?
Sure. I mean, I think I did speak about, the growing frustration that we see happening in schools. I mean, I'm not quite sure what are the reasonings behind, white teachers not stepping in when they see Black children fighting. But I mean, I think what we've been able to identify that unless these issues are dealt with as they happen, that continues to fester and grow resentment. And even that, I see that broadly also when it comes to the kind of mechanisms that government has enacted as well, right? We see, even though we can take matters to the equality courts, we also then see how that process takes quite a while to be able to finalize. And the same goes with the South African Human Rights Commission as well, right? And even in their complaints resolution, I think because of the the way that the justice system, the judiciary, is backlogged in the matters that they have to deal with, you often find that these matters also then end up in settlement rather than being adjudicated at a judiciary level. And I think that's something that we also need to be able to focus on in trying to strengthen the tools that we have already, because a part of the matters going to the Equality Court then clarifies the kind of interpersonal dynamics of racism and the societal attitudes. But even with more recent cases coming out and people utilizing the equality courts more often, we're starting to also see cases emerging from the kind of systemic element of racism. And it's important also that we highlight these cases as ways to also show people that this is how we should be able to behave in society, right? And even with those matters, it's important that we encourage people to be able to speak about those moments as they happen, because even when they don't speak about it, what we then go see is people then develop this narrative of, okay, well, if no one then cares about my issues, I will retreat back to my corner and deal personally with my own issues, which then creates the compounded effect of not feeling as though South Africa represents you, or not feeling as though you share part of the South African national identity. So I think a lot needs to still be done in terms of education and awareness at a school level, but I also think that we need to be able to strengthen our put in the comments, our consequent management tools as a country as well. I mean, part of the questions that we've been seeing coming up also during Anti-Racism Week and also in our engagements with people is the question of how is Orania still able to exist, right? And we know that groupings such as AfriForum, in the spreading of disinformation, but in the way that they operate, they speak of cultural groups. And if then Orania is protected under the essence of a cultural group, what then does that mean about other cultural groupings which might then oppose this forgotten one, or one that hasn't been dealt with over all these years? So I think in general, I think we're very much on a good track as South Africa. You know, as we mentioned earlier in the panel today, a lot of countries look to us because of what we've been able to achieve and what we've been able to achieve without the use of violence predominantly as well. And I think we need to be able to strengthen our efforts, even when we see racial dynamics or conflicts playing out in the media. We see that that is really the only time then when people want to voice out their frustrations or take action or question what is being done. But this is something that needs to start to become the foundation of all the things that we do. I think, interestingly enough, the past couple of days, the South African Human Rights Commission was hosting a conference on this national question. And one of the ideas that came out of that even was, how about we look at enacting a sort of compliance certificate that can be given to private organizations to say in these tools, or in this way that we measure, you are compliant with the foundational standard of human rights or furthering human rights. And I mean, those are things that we need to look into further. I think even the conversations that we've been having and the critiques around BEE as well, and people then just opposing that with the ideas of a means-based economy or means-based criteria, is conversations that we need to be able to push further to say what we've done so far hasn't given us the results that we hoped for. Not to say it hasn't worked, but just not the results that we've hoped for. And how can we include some of these critiques in strengthening that, right? Because a means-based is a great approach, but it doesn't necessarily then look at the societal attitudes and perceptions of race relations in South Africa. But by including a means-based criteria in the policy that we do, it might then begin to bring into the conversation or into the fold those people, the kind of nuanced people at the bottom that might not feature in these conversations. I mean, in the comments, we even have seen, the way that the Khoisan in South Africa have felt slighted, right? Even during this conference that the Commission held, we had someone who was speaking about the fact that they don't enjoy this color term, and they feel like it was a term that was placed upon the Khoisan, and that's not something that they want to then relate to. But we need to be able to also have these conversations within our community to say, as a community, there's so many nuances that exist amongst us, and how is it that we're going to then move forward the way that we want to be able to do. And that's why I also then say it's important that once we have these conversations internally, starting with ourselves, but also in our broader communities, but then we're able to come together as South Africans to be able to co-create an idea of justice. I mean, the Rainbow Nation was something I know in my time and when I was young was was very much pushed onto us. It wasn't an ideal that I resonated with or that I accepted broadly. But if we're able to then co-create with more people that feel marginalized in society, showing in a sense the kind of things that we have done to include those voices, then it's important that we look towards doing that. And hopefully with the national dialogue coming up, those are some of the aspects that will be answered in this national dialogue.
Thank you very much. Now, you've raised an national dialogue, and I find often, even though we are on various platforms, that we're having many dialogues, we don't seem to see those as significant, or having this dialogue as an example. We're almost always wanting something else to be coming in and responding, as though it's only up to one entity. So will we take all these questions? I'm just throwing it up because we're constantly getting comments like that we've got to do something. So when we have these dialogues, is that not enough? Is that not opening up the issues for the discussion? Do we take up the same points at the national dialogue, which of course we should, but does this not move the needle, as Ms. Zodwa Velleman was saying, is when do we know that we move from the bottom of the ladder where she places us? Have we moved? Are we moving up the ladder? What is the goal point? The goalpost over and above saying eliminating racial discrimination. I'm going to open up the floor to have 2 or 3 questions, but as we do so, I'm going to pick on some of the questions so that if anyone wants to answer these in their responses a bit later, you could use that opportunity. A comment from Unverified, so we'll call you Anonymous, says, despite the misgovernance aspect, and this is for you, Excellency, what from a social cultural perspective could have gone wrong in us all committing to the ideals of the preamble of the Constitution? I think that's a bit of a corollary to what Ms. Ratsomo has raised as to we don't have a shared national identity, and we've not all approached or been experiencing apartheid from the same vantage point. So I'm hoping to get some questions from the floor. And just wanting to see if there's any other questions I could read out before I bring over to you, Ambassador. I want to take some questions so we could start rounding up, and you could include those in your comments. If you just hold on a minute. I see more questions coming up with some details again from the Katora's Parliament. So thank you for those. We may not take all of those right now, but we'll certainly get back to you, seeing that you have given us enough details that we could follow up. I think there's comments about accountability and performance management, which I haven't summarized yet. So I don't see anyone wanting to ask questions from the online participants. Perhaps the technical team will help me identify if anyone is able to see if there are comments or questions from the audience. We've just opened up the platform. Any takers? Okay, everyone is incredibly shy. So yes, Excellency, you wanted to pick up on some points.
Yes, I think you particularly asked the question, is the preamble of the Constitution and the significant question was asked, what has gone wrong from a socio-economic, socio-cultural perspective, that the preamble of the Constitution has taken a knock, if you like, as it were. I have to first say I don't have all the answers on that one. that I think it's genuinely worth of further reflection, further probing, and possibly even further research surveys to answer why is it that the preamble of the Constitution, including the healing aspect, has taken what we would, it has in some ways retrogressed. But as I was suggesting early on, I was in many ways glad that the African Union had taken on the aspects of reparations. And I think it's worthy for all our participants here to consider watching her presentation the Prime Minister of Barbados made at the last opening of the African Union Summit, because she found, I thought, very effective ways of healing and reparations, from simple things of the issue of travelers from Africa, from the parts of the world which had suffered from slavery, from all the ravages of colonialism, to be given simple access to travel easily. She had come up with very practical solutions. So I think in a similar way, hopefully when somebody does that research in your department or one of the universities or relevant sections, including the DIRCO director of vulnerable groups, Ms. Molifani, we could get to the bottom of it and then find ways to implement some of the possible things which can be done. Like, I think you've compiled a very good report as what we did after the TRC Commission, what were the doables, what was not very practical, what was also possible, whether it was simple housing for the victims, whether it was the range of educational scholarships given to the victims, and then also the issue of social cultural influences. I think my sense is it's rather alarming when you sit in social conversations in different groups right across the board in South Africa. You sometimes have to be like what you call it, a cultural policeman, or you have to be a cultural commissar to engage people sitting with you and explain to them the ravages of patriarchal attitudes. And as I must admit, it's not easy. Even sometimes when you're sitting at a social cultural level with extended members of the family, or in other situations when you're having a conversation at a restaurant or a pub, the social cultural attitudes are disturbing at times, and that possibly explains why we have one of the highest gender-based violence rates in the world. And I can also assure you that we're not alone in this. I mean, if you look at the Nordic countries and the high rate of suicide and the high levels of depression people are experiencing, I think the latest report in the UK that mental depression illnesses are on the rise. So we, in this all together, in our different ships, in our different contexts, to try to heal, to try to engage with each other. At the end of the day, it's only one South Africa that we have. And we want it to be a good, non-racial, non-sexist, cohesive country. I know there are going to be bumps along the way. There are going to be some small, big potholes along the way. But I think the fact that we went through worse in the past suggests to us that we can glean the lessons from the past as well as the lessons many other countries go through to overcome that. And it comes back to the issue of justice. And I just mentioned there in the chat room that one of the audits of the Auditor General was the fast tracking of consequent management, and to see it's literally implemented and monitor that process. And then also all the other necessary mechanisms for reparations in the way possible in South Africa, from social responsibilities of big corporations to the economic changing of developments. And one of the good pieces of news is I've been following on X, or Twitter as we referred to it in the past, the huge growth in our agricultural sector. And it has to do with the fact that South Africans can do it. And we all know South African farmers were encouraged to go to Mozambique, Zambia, Central African Republic. The other day, I just saw a report. They're now in one of the federal states of Nigeria to turn things around. So in this interconnected world we're living in, I believe the sharing of experiences, the interconnected lessons to be learned, mistakes to avoid, is what will really help us in dealing with that question, a very significant question of why the socio-cultural aspects has taken us back in implementing the preamble. And I hope we will find more refreshing answers as well as we deal with that huge challenge. Thank you, DDG.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Now, I want to recognize and thank you for those points. We will, in the rounding up, pick on one or two of the points, as well as going through with two of the online participants who want to ask a question. I'm going to recognize them very shortly. But I also wanted to say that I see more comments coming from the Katora's Parliament members. Thank you for all these questions and complaints about service delivery that you are having. This really helps us to navigate within the department. We won't respond to those on this platform right now, but if you could also put the reference numbers on the platform, I will refer them, and the NAP team for the Department of Justice will refer them accordingly to our branch that deals with court administrative matters. Anyone else is also welcome to raise any of these concerns you have where there might have been, inefficient services that you might have had experience. Please put the case numbers down and any other information, and or also respond onto our departmental website and the complaints line and the email if it's not on this platform, so we can respond to you. Another point I wanted to raise is that if you want to, the clip that you mentioned, which I had the absolute privilege of being at the AU when Prime Minister Mia Mottley made her comments, and this was to introduce this year's theme on racial healing at the African Union. It was phenomenal, feeling the energy as much as you see it on the clip. So we're putting a link to it, but it's quite easily accessible if you go onto YouTube under the African Union, because she introduced and really, as you said, made significant comments about addressing racial healing, but also reparations for Africans on our continent. in case you don't get that here. Now, Boichoko, you've had your hand up and you wanted to comment, so you have the floor. And then after Boichoko speaks, Nell Darrell, we've recognized you as well. So allow me to call upon Boichoko. I hope I've got the name correct. That's the only name. I just had one name for you. Over to you. And please state your name, if you come from an organization or you're just a concerned citizen who's joined us today. Give us some background and then your comment question, and if you are posing it to anyone in particular or just to the dialogue. Uchoko, are you there?
I'm here, Chairperson. Thank you. I am Wichoko and my surname is Moremi. I am the senior manager for
Would you speak a little louder or closer? Sorry, would you speak a little louder or closer to the mic, please, so we could hear you?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Chair?
No, we hear you, but it's not as loud as it could be. Let's get closer to your microphone. Thanks.
Okay. I am Wichoko. My surname is Moremi. I'm working for the Pan South African Language Board, Pan South. We are experiencing discriminations throughout the 9 provinces when it comes to the Khoisan languages. That is hurting the communities deeply. No school, no university, no college in the country teaching these languages, and they feel discriminated against. Now, through this platform, that also contributed to issues of anger and non-recognition. You will also realize that there was a king at the Union Building for some time trying to raise the plight of the Khoisan communities in the country. Now, these issues are creating a problem when it comes to working for equality and advancing human rights in the country. I think this is a relevant platform to also contribute this on this platform. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very, very much. I know there were questions that were also posed by colleagues on PanSAB, especially the Khoisan languages. So I thought you would have also responded to some of those, but we note your question. And then the next person was Nell Darrell. Nell, would you come through? And also, would you speak very loudly into the microphone, please? Thanks.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Nell, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, very well, Nell. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I have a comment to make. It's not really a question, but it can be answered in terms of what I'm going to say. So for me, government just needs to relook at the way they include the LGBTQA plus community that is in the government as well as in the private sector, that is now in the work sector. So when we look, for example, at the Z83, we still only see male and female as a selection. So if we look at the various non-binaries out there, the people that is being seen as pronouns they, theirs. So those particular selections or options are not there. So if government wants to have equality and advance the human rights, we need to actually start there. So government also doesn't have a way of ensuring that the community is fairly represented in the workplace. That is not knowing if the community is negatively impacted in the workplace. So we also don't have any programs, or there is very low number of programs coming from government on the ground level to ensure that the human rights of the community is being upheld. So when we look at the workplace environment, government especially, as well as the private sector, we don't have any form of knowing whether that person is, when that person is going for an interview, that person is being fairly treated by um, by by the presence and by the points that they score basically. So in cases that I've heard so far, not many, people have been said no to based on the fact that they are in the community. They are gay or lesbian, or they are transsexual. So those particular matters is very important to actually note down and to keep track of in government and in the private sector, because people are being negatively impacted when it comes to the work environment. So I just want to know if there is such a platform where those particular people can say, but I have been negatively impacted, apart from the CCMA, going to the CCMA and complaining there. So that is just my comments on equality and the human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nell. Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing very significant points to this conversation. I will respond to some of them very directly now. But before I do, I just wanted to say that we had to say goodbye to Ms. Malifani, who had indicated that she had to leave. We thank her very much for her contribution and participation today in the dialogue. Ms. Malifani, you're excused. And again, we thank you very much for contributing to the session. Of course, once the report is ready, we will certainly share that with you. Now, Nell, I just wanted to
I'm
make
still here. If I can make just one quick comment, I need to leave in 2 minutes straight.
Okay, please, let's do that. Sorry, I didn't know you were there. Great. Please go ahead.
Okay, no, thank you. I'll be very quick. My next meeting is starting soon. I just wanted to maybe just make one last comment, a point that I didn't raise, which I think is very critical, and that is one of our national human rights institutions. Particularly the South African Human Rights Commission, but the others as well, such as the Commission for Gender Equality and so on, because an issue has been raised by the committee several times in several fora that it needs to be strengthened, they need to be made more independent, and I think if we had a stronger national human rights institution, some of these challenges that we are discussing today would be dealt with by that institution. So we really need to look at making it more independent and increase its capacity. So that is the issue that I wanted to raise, which I thought I'll just wait 1 minute to just talk about that. But in conclusion, just to quote the Universal Declaration on Human Rights that says all human beings are born free, equal, with dignity and rights. And we need to always remember that as South Africans so that we can promote a culture of inclusivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malifani. I would say to you, the Human Rights Commission, I'm not going to speak on their behalf, has a very strong legal framework where they must act without fear, favor, or prejudice, so they're fully independent. I think it's the implementation that you're speaking to, and certainly they need to be better resourced given the multiple and complex you were able to make some concluding remarks. We appreciate that very much, and bring us back to connect with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now back to Nell's points. Nell, there's a few things I want to raise very quickly. Is the first one is in this branch we have the SOGIS project, which obviously you know stands for sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and sex characteristics. And within that project, we have the rapid response task teams that are located across the country in every province, where through the rapid response task teams, issues that affect the LGBTQIA plus community, especially where there's violence, hurt, charges, offenses, and harm that members of the community experience, can report and speak to members of the rapid response task team. These are coordinated by us as the Department of Justice, but is made up of members of civil society, especially members of the community. So that project is meant, it's obviously anchored under the National Implementation Strategy for SOGISC, which is a cabinet through a cabinet decision, and unfortunately, the National Task Team that takes in all the information from the rapid response task teams only meet once a quarter. However, the rapid response teams meet monthly, and there's follow-up and tracking. In fact, it's one of our very successful task teams that's connected with also South African Police Services National Prosecution Authority. That's just on the rapid response aspect, which is a subcommittee of the National Task Team. Other issues of policy and the overall implementation now of the National Intervention Strategy is then managed in a more wider, broader way. We could do a whole lot better. There's still lots of challenges. Ourselves having, experiencing capacity challenges, but I think fora like this helps us to understand also where we must do better. As for workplace, it's certainly something we'll take up. The team that's here who deals with eliminating racial discrimination in all of its multidimensionality actually find dialogues like this, which then helps us to decide for the next theme during Anti-Racism Week, during Human Rights Month, for Freedom Month, which will focus on more on insulating the constitutional democracy, fortifying it, which is a bit of a different theme. But throughout the year, we do run some of these, not just dialogues, policy discussions, and also look at our implementation. So please do watch out on all of our social media sites that you'll find, and also you will find them on our Department of Justice website. We obviously have your contact list, so we usually use those as well to reach out to communities on the various topics that we run throughout the year. Now, I think a quick fix, because we also do engage predominantly with the Public Service Commission, the Department of Public Services. So we will definitely pick up on the Z83 form, which I can't see being too much of a challenge to change. And I'm just sorry that we haven't done it sooner. I myself haven't looked at that form for a while, so it wasn't at the forefront of my mind, for which I apologize that we haven't picked up on that to have made that change. So our team will certainly also follow up in that regard. I think also what you raise, Nell and others, is that we need to, and I think, Excellency, you've also raised that, how do we feel like we belong, whether it's at our tables, whether it's in our communities, whether we're just meeting colleagues and friends and family over the weekends, what are the kind, and I think that's a gap that we need to fill in, as to how do we contribute to providing the kind of scripts to help us along, because that's certainly a gap. How do we manage this in the workplace? Perhaps have more dialogues and have more engagements, and also have the kind of environments where it's safe to complain, it's safe to submit formal complaints and that they are processed, have the kinds of committees that look at the sectoral issues. So it's not just racism or gender, but also LGBTQIA plus issues. So I think workplaces need to look at that. I think in the women's sector, especially as an example, because I am a lawyer, we have many of these, in fact, very concerted efforts by the likes of Ms. Zodwa Velleman, who've actually set up the where they go to the law firms and require that you have these various dialogues and or respond to some of the challenges so that the sensitization happens, and that as society changes or understands each other's point of view, there are areas of convergence, which also brings me to the point that Ms. Ratsomo was raising as to how do we then develop this common grounds. We might have different common grounds depending on the issues, but it's already a discussion for us to take forward. Now, I don't know if I've answered all of those questions or some of them. I'm now going to go to our two panelists before I hand over to both the program director and Ms. Fransman to do the closing. So here's the last opportunity. I'll start with Ms. Ratsomo. Any last comments that you want to respond to before we close? And then, of course, over to you, Ambassador, and then over to Program Director and Ms. Fransman. Ms. Ratsomo, any closing remarks from your side? Ms. Ratsomo, are you still with us? I don't know if you're still muted. I can't see you on the platform. Perhaps, Excellency, we go over to you. If Ms. Ratsomo joins us, we'll capture that moment. Over to you, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Now we can hear you. Yes, sorry, we couldn't hear you for a second.
Okay. No, thanks again. And I want to say that I found this panel really enriching.
All good, Ambassador. Over to you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, yes. Right. Go ahead.
Good. Now, I was saying I found this panel really enriching, and especially to hear the rich range of South African accents and dialects, especially for us who are out here in the west part of Africa, to hear the enriching and rich dialogue happening is helpful for us as well. And I'm sure many people appreciate the efforts of your department and your team, DOJ, and constitutional development as well. I just want to make two quick points. In talking about comparative experiences and the whole nation-building exercise with all its aspects, when I arrived here in Liberia in the year 2022, a survey was conducted and it found that almost 70% or more of the population are designated as youth. And I think we know within the continent, the youth bulge is both an asset and can also be a risk and a deficit for the continent itself. But the good thing is we decided as an embassy to focus on youth development and economic opportunities. So in that context, we then invited the then coordinator of the Youth League, who currently is deputy minister in the presidency, Nomkeba Mhloli, and she engaged with the youth leaders in Liberia. And when she was going back to South Africa, she gave a report to the National Working Committee. And one of the key lessons, she said, is we need to get our youth to read more about the comparative experiences in other parts of the world, and specifically the fact that Liberia in its 60s, 70s, 80s, as I was saying, it was the Cape Town and Johannesburg of West Africa. You had the Miriam Makebas here, the Hugh Masekelas here, the Simone de Vaux over here. You had President Mandela himself here. You had the exiled Soweto leader Tebogo Mashishini here, who is hailed by the student leaders here. But the one lesson which many of our youth leaders who have come here to Liberia and gone back, and the same when they visited Eritrea, is to avoid by all costs a civil war. Because what you've seen here in Liberia, the civil war was so brutal that every piece of infrastructure was brought down, including the electricity grid itself. So the Liberians, when they came up with this peace agreement in 2003, and I'm glad President Thabo Mbeki played a key role in this regard. He sent the Navy, he sent the Special Forces, the Army, the police, and persuaded then Charles Taylor as president, as per the agreement, to fly with him in President Mbeki's plane from Monrovia to Abuja as had been agreed on. And in this way, since 2003, up until now, the peace agreement has held with all its ups and downs. We just had here the well-known African peacemaker, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, who was the former UN Under-Secretary General and the first special advisor for Africa to any UN Secretary General, once again to take the peacemaking forward. So I think the lesson is that for young South African leaders, the youth, I think they would need exposure to countries which have gone through civil wars to then glean the lesson that, hey, this is not a route worth contemplating about or thinking about at all. Because in the two civil wars Liberia went through, they had to start from scratch in the year 2003. The then Liberian government wrote to the South African government, we don't even have radio towers, so the police, the army can communicate with each other and so forth. So the South African government felt that it should contribute in whatever way it can. It sent a company here to build radio towers in Liberia, and the South African Kenwood radios have been brought into the system to help in the peacemaking project. The last point I made is to touch on the point you mentioned. Yeah, to develop what we'll call speaking notes, or as you mentioned it, as a script. I find that very helpful. In fact, DIRCO, our department, does that, and I think a few other departments also does that. And the same, we also rely on your speaking notes whenever we have to speak on key topics relating to that justice and constitutional development. So I think, yeah, sort of key social notes or a TikTok note or whatever, I'm sure will help a lot to many in these social circles when they are engaging family members, friends, and their buddies and sisters, wherever they find themselves. So once again, my thanks to you and team Department of Justice for putting this very enriching panel together today. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Excellency. We're so privileged to have had you throughout for the duration of this talk. And as always, offer insights and remind us of so many of our valuable insights, our experiences that we tend to forget. And as you were saying now, it's something I've always said to many is, if you just move to other countries and see how civil war has ravaged the country. I remember when I went to Angola many years ago, immediately after its civil war. And one of the little kids that was walking around was would just come to visit a friend at the time, and saw kids who had obviously been affected by the landmines, and it was almost the norm to see a child with either one leg amputated, arm amputated, or both arms, sometimes both legs. And this child was completely shocked at seeing young children without all of their limbs, not appreciating what, it was a 4-year-old, not appreciating what persons with disability is like, and not understanding what a country has gone through when the systems, including your body parts, have been ravaged and maimed. And we tend to, especially in this geopolitical environment, tend to not appreciate that we're still standing strong as a nation, sovereign as we are and mature as we are, to respond to some of the issues that are affecting us whilst we're going through our own racial healing at this point. So maybe that's a point. I certainly am not going to be the one who is going to assist with the TikTok videos, I can assure you, but we've got a lot of young members of our department. In fact, we're just looking at the statistics yesterday. We have a very high younger population, especially under the 38 years. So in terms of our youth definition, many are still falling within the youth definition. So we'll leave all the TikToking, if one could say that. And I'm sure my 20-year-old son who's listening in is probably going to laugh and say that's not a term that is used, as I'm sure all the young people around me, one of whom sitting in front of me, is busy trying to hold back her laugh at this point in time. But I think those are very good examples to use with our messaging. So thank you for that. And then I just want to, I know our other colleague, Ms. Ratsomo, had to leave, but I wanted to say also thank you to her for bringing in the Ahmed Kathrada, whose whole work, life and purpose was to ensure elimination of racial discrimination with his own, just by his own spirit and passion, but also with what was set up through the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation for their support, but also to bring to the fore the various many projects that we must still strengthen and deepen with young people in the country. Annually, we ourselves run the moot court competition for high schools across the country, which brings forward the issues of the Constitution that high school pupils, especially in grade, well, for this year, we've decided to keep it to grade 10 and 11, so that matrics can focus on their year, but also to debate these until they knock each other out and win the final court competition that we have at the Constitutional Court before judges, some of whom are from the Constitutional Court, and it's held at Constitutional Hill, and it's live annually. So it is one of the mechanisms, but certainly not enough. So I think in high schools, we've got far more work to do. This discussion has been incredibly helpful, insightful. It's also given us a whole lot of other tools that we need to work through. So our team, Elimination of Racial Discrimination and National Action Plan, there's lots of ideas for us to take through. We will, when this report is compiled, place it on our website. So I can't thank all of you enough. I also want to say that for those questions we didn't answer, not that we could answer all of them. Panelists did a sterling job of responding. We will, in the report, respond to them. If we don't, and you follow of our other dialogues, we will pick up, like we've done previously, pick up, especially where we've seen some themes emerging, pick them up during the rest of the year. But I think we need to continue speaking as society. If anything, this very difficult moment that we're going through, especially geopolitically, is an opportunity. Whilst we do acknowledge some of the challenges we face, especially socioeconomic issues and other aspects, it's an opportunity for us to galvanize, because I think none of us, very few of us, that's a very small number, would want our country to ever return to where we started from. As you mentioned, Excellency, we were worse off, and anything is going to take us to be better. So I think we will all defend it and protect as much as we fight with each other on a daily basis, protect it with all of our might. So with that said, I just want to thank all my team before I hand over to the rest of the colleagues for putting this dialogue together, and for all of our partners, panelists, speakers for today. It's been fascinating as always, a lot of lessons learned, and we look forward to, together with you, to continue building these platforms to address racism in all of its forms in our country. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Program Director. We seem to have... Are you there, Ms. Nept? There
Yes,
you are.
I am. I just, my mouse is battling to move. Okay, here it is. Thank you very much. We've had such an insightful panel discussion, and I'm hoping that everyone has really gained a very, very good knowledge today. We're very excited, and once again, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to our panelists. We've seen a lot of comments on the window. Keep it up, and thank you very much, all of those that have managed to do so. To our panelists, Ms. Ntabiseng Malefane, Ms. Ritabile Ratsomo, in their absence, and His Excellency Ambassador Jasbey, we really appreciate your valuable insight, as well as the thought-provoking contributions and international learnings. Your perspectives have really enriched our understanding and reinforced the need for continued action towards building a truly non-racial society. It is clear, my colleagues and all the attendees, delegates, dignitaries, that the journey towards a true non-racialism requires continued efforts, intentional action, and a collective responsibility. We appreciate your time, your commitment, as well as your dedication to this important cause. Can we give them, please, a well-deserved round of applause? Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Advocate Said and your team, for trusting me to direct this program. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope I've done what you wanted me to do. To officially then close this program, it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Daneline Fransman, one of our colleagues, who will share some final thoughts and reflections on this very topic and our way forward. My colleague, over to you.
Good morning, or actually it is afternoon now, to all the colleagues and participants and our esteemed speakers and panelists. I think my job really is going to be quite simple. Program Director has kindly already covered, some of the conclusions and vote of thanks to some extent. So I think from my side is really just to, again, reiterate the gratitude for everyone to participate. As the department, the Directorate ERD, Elimination of Racial Discrimination, had been spending quite a bit of time planning this event, which of course is now to close the Human Rights Month, as well as mark the Anti-Racism Week this year, and which marks its 10th anniversary. In addition, of course, we have some key milestones that we've celebrated, some of them being the 60th anniversary of the adoption of ICERD, as well as the fact that we are also, spending time to reflect on 70 years since the Freedom Charter was adopted. I don't want to go much into the gems that were shared, but I think just to reiterate again, the need for sustained commitment, collaboration, efforts to continue to raise awareness of rights, targeting the youth. Also, some comments that were made, which I would like to quote, that silence is the biggest poison. Also to reflect on Ubuntu as the recognition of our shared humanity that must guide us. Again, a reminder about the importance of the ICERD, which was referred to as a timeless convention, and how together with the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, these are really establishing the framework for combating racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. The importance of, grounding our work and approach on intersectionality. I think that is also very important. And of course, that rights are interdependent, interlinked, and universal. So as much as we can, promote racial tolerance, non-discrimination, and equality, that is closely tied also to the need for social justice and socioeconomic transformation. So just in short, thank you again for your time, your contributions, and to hopefully ongoing collaboration, and also to the team for all the hard work that you have put into making this event a possibility. Thank you so much. Over to you, Program Director, if there is any more that you would like to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nalin. On that note, colleagues would like to really thank everyone. We would want to be a part of this project going forward. Do not forget us in your future invitations. So thank you. Have a lovely and a blessed weekend. The meeting is adjourned.